All right, diving right in this time, we're talking OpenBIM and IFC, two things that are causing quite a stir in the construction world, and we're going to figure out where open source software fits into all of this. We've got a bunch of really interesting YouTube videos lined up, so let's get right into it.
It's definitely a hot topic, and for good reason, I think. We're talking about the possibility of really shaping up how the construction industry does things, from the ground up.
Oh, absolutely. It feels like we're on the cusp of a digital revolution in construction, wouldn't you say? But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's make sure everyone listening is on the same page. When we say BIM, we're talking about more than just those fancy 3D models, right?
Right. Building information modeling, BIM for short, is a whole lot bigger than just visuals. It's more like imagine a digital twin of an entire building, from the very first design sketches all the way to when it's eventually torn down and everything in between.
So we're talking about making the entire process smoother, catching mistakes early on, and ultimately saving everyone involved a whole bunch of time and money.
Exactly, and that's where OpenBIM and IFC enter the picture.
Okay, so walk me through this. In a perfect world, what are we hoping to achieve with OpenBIM and IFC?
All right, picture this. You've got architects, engineers, contractors, basically everyone involved in a project, and they can all share information seamlessly, regardless of what software they're using. No hiccups, no headaches. That's the OpenBIM dream, and IFC, or Industry Foundation Classes, if you want the full name, is the language that's supposed to make that dream a reality.
So IFC is like a universal translator for all these different software programs.
Yeah.
No more lost data, no more compatibility nightmares. That sounds amazing, but is it actually working that way in the real world?
Well, that's where things get a little, shall we say, interesting. Don't get me wrong, the potential is huge, especially when you think about the possibilities for automation and reducing those costly errors, which, as you said, means saving time and money. But, and this is a big but, there's a bit of a disconnect between what's being promised and what's actually happening out there in the field.
There's always a catch, isn't there?
Okay.
You've definitely piqued my curiosity. What's the issue?
The problem is, while you have all these commercial BIM software companies saying they support OpenBIM and IFC, the way they actually put these standards into practice, well, let's just say it can be a bit inconsistent.
Inconsistent.
It leads to all sorts of problems, like crucial data vanishing when you're trying to move files between different programs, or just the general headache of trying to get different software to play nice with each other. All of that adds up to a lot of frustrated people.
So it's like buying a phone that claims to be universally compatible, but then realizing it can only call other phones from the same brand.
Yeah.
That's incredibly frustrating. Are there any specific examples from what we've been looking at where this falls apart?
One example that really jumped out at me involves something that seems pretty minor at first glance, how they represent reinforcing bars, rebar within concrete slabs.
Rebar. Okay, now we're getting into the weeds a bit.
It might seem like a small detail, but it highlights a much bigger issue. You see, when one of these popular BIM programs exports an IFC file, there's a problem with how those rebar elements are grouped. The IFC standard is very clear. The rebar needs to be a subclass of the slab, showing it's contained within it, right? But a lot of these programs, they're not doing that correctly. Instead, the rebar ends up being exported as its own separate thing, completely disconnected from the slab.
Wow, I never realized how much those little details matter in the grand scheme of things.
They're crucial.
So instead of the IFC file understanding that the rebar is embedded in the slab, it's treating them like they're just hanging out next to each other, not part of a cohesive whole. So what does that actually mean in a practical sense?
Imagine you're trying to use an automated code compliance tool, right? That tool, it needs to understand the relationship between that slab and the rebar to do its job properly. But if the IFC file isn't speaking the right language, that tool could miss vital information, potentially leading to errors, delays, you name it. It all adds up.
That makes perfect sense. It's like trying to bake a cake with a recipe that sends the flour and eggs to different addresses. So we've got this amazing potential with OpenBIM and IFC, but the software isn't quite living up to the hype because of these inconsistencies. Seems like that needs to be a different approach, wouldn't you say? So if the commercial software is having a tough time getting it right, is there a different path to actually achieve this OpenBIM vision? What about going the open source route?
Now you're talking. See, unlike closed source software where everything's locked away under wraps, open source lets anyone and everyone get their hands dirty with the code, make changes, share it around. It's all out in the open. Think of it like a public recipe. Anyone can tweak it, improve it. You get the idea.
It's like the difference between hoarding a secret cake recipe versus sharing it with a whole community of bakers who can all add their own little something special.
Exactly. And that's where FreeCAD comes in.
FreeCAD.
It's completely free, completely open source BIM software. And the best part, it's got this awesome community of developers constantly tinkering with it, making it better every day.
That active development community, that's got to be the key, right? It means FreeCAD can actually keep up with the ever-changing world of OpenBIM.
Exactly. It's agile, it can adapt. One of the YouTube videos we watched showed FreeCAD being used with something called bimserver.org.
Wait, hold on, back up a second. An open source BIM server? What is this bimserver.org thing?
Basically, picture it as Grand Central Station, but for all your project data. Everyone on the team can access it no matter what.
Okay.
In the video, they put together a simple house model in FreeCAD, exported it as an IFC file, you know, the drill, and then uploaded it straight to bimserver.org.
So they're going all in on open source for both the design and the collaboration side of things. But what's the big deal about using a BIM server anyway? Why not just email files back and forth like we used to?
Emailing files, that's like passing notes in class. It's slow, it's messy, and you can never be sure if you've got the latest version. Bimserver.org, it's like a breath of fresh air. It brings everyone together in sync. Everyone's on the same page.
Literally.
It does real-time collaboration, version control, the whole shebang. And let's not forget about streamlining data management across the entire project.
So it's like we've upgraded to a shared Google Doc, but for buildings.
Exactly. And because it's open source, you're not tied to one specific BIM software. You've got options.
This is really cool stuff. Sounds like open source solutions like FreeCAD and bimserver.org could be the answer to those problems we were talking about earlier. But I have a feeling it's not all smooth sailing, is it? What kind of hurdles are we still facing?
You're right. It's not a magic bullet, unfortunately. One thing that really struck me, even though FreeCAD is built with these open standards in mind, it still leans on this separate software library, IFC OpenShell, to really get a handle on all the complexities of IFC files.
So even when everyone's trying their best and playing by the rules, we're still stuck with this whole tangled web of interconnected software, each with its own little quirks and potential for things to go wrong.
It definitely highlights the fact that we need to keep pushing forward with development, and not just for individual programs like FreeCAD, but for the whole open BIM ecosystem. It's a marathon, not a sprint, as they say.
So how do we get over these hurdles and unlock the full potential of OpenBIM? What needs to happen? It really seems like the key here is working together.
100%, yeah.
Like they say, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And it sounds like we've got a long way to go before OpenBIM is really where it could be. But I'm curious, why is this open source approach so important in the bigger picture? Couldn't the big software companies just figure out OpenBIM on their own?
They probably could eventually, but the beauty of these open standards is that they level the playing field. You know what I mean?
Wow.
It stops any one company from having all the power, dictating how the whole industry works.
It's about avoiding that dreaded vendor lock-in, right?
That's it.
Where you're essentially stuck with one particular software because all your data is trapped in their format, like being stuck on a roller coaster that never ends.
Exactly. Open standards give you the freedom to use the right tools for the job, and you know you can move your data around without any hassle.
So it encourages healthy competition, more innovation across the board.
For sure.
Which is definitely what we want to see in the construction industry, right?
Absolutely.
Well, this has been an incredible deep dive, to say the least. We've gone from the amazing potential of OpenBIM to the reality of IFC implementation, which has some catching up to do, and finally to the hope that open source solutions like FreeCAD and bimserver.org bring to the table. It's pretty clear that construction is going digital, but whether open source will be leading the charge or if commercial software will finally step up, well, that's the million-dollar question.
It's a dynamic situation for sure, one worth keeping an eye on.
You've definitely given me, and I'm sure everyone listening, a lot to think about. If you're anything like me, you're probably itching to check out FreeCAD, bimserver.org, dip your toes into the open BIM world and see what it's all about. Don't worry, we'll put links to all the resources we talked about in the show notes.
And who knows, maybe you'll be the one building the next big open BIM solution.
Now that's an exciting thought. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep building the future.